Okay, we are continuing with the Sasquatch Escape, and we remembered that the end of chapter 14, it left us off with Pearl and Ben noticing that the Sasquatch had definitely been inside Buttonville because neighbors were noticing that things were arranged by color, and then they heard a scream that they thought that they would go and investigate to see where the Sasquatch was. Chapter 15, Sloth Sighting. A short way down the block, they found the source of the scream. An elderly lady who was leaning against the handles of her walker, her eyes staring into space as if made by glass. "That's Mrs. Fruit," Pearl told Ben as they ran toward her. "She's the oldest person in Buttonville. She doesn't like me because I broke her garden gnome." "How'd you do that?" Ben asked, the contents of the Sasquatch catching kit jiggling with his frantic steps. "It was an accident," Pearl explained. "I wanted to get to the nest that was in Mrs. Fruit's tree to add to my nest collection, but it was way up at the top branch. So I climbed the tree, but then the branch broke and I fell around top of the gnome and its head popped off." Mrs. Fruit stood in the front yard next to her white picket fence. Dozens of colorful painted gnomes dotted her yard as if sprouted like weeds. The headless one still stood beneath the tree. Mrs. Fruit's bony fingers gripped the handlebars of her walker as she stared down the sidewalk. "Hello, Mrs. Fruit. We heard a scream," said Pearl, and a strangled sound emerged from Mrs. Fruit's mouth, as if the word was trying to escape from deep, deep down inside her. Pearl poked the lady's arm. "Are you okay?" The sound just got louder. "I bet she's trying to say Sasquatch," Ben whispered to Pearl. "She must know where it is." "Mrs. Fruit, what did you see?" Pearl poked her again. "Did you see something big and hairy?" Ben asked. Yes, Mrs. Fruit said with trembling lips. "I saw a sloth." "A sloth?" Pearl and Ben said at the same time. Mrs. Fruit finally blinked, and then she took a long, wheezy breath, and her eyes went wild, spinning around like they might fly right out of her head. "A terrible, enormous, hairy sloth right here in Buttonville. It tried to eat me." "Are you sure it was a sloth?" Ben asked. He was pretty sure that sloths didn't live in North America, and he was doubtedly sure that Mrs. Fruit had seen something terrible, enormous, and hairy. It was most likely the escaped Sasquatch. But events had been so strange lately, he couldn't be 100% of anything. "Tell us what happened," Pearl said. Mrs. Fruit looked up to the tree branch that loomed overhead. "I was on my way to the senior center. It's puddin' day, you know. I wanted to get some butterscotch before Mabel ate it all. She's always hogging all the butterscotch. But then I heard this strange sound, and there it was, sitting right there in that tree." Ben walked around the tree where he found a big footprint pressed into the matted grass, and there, dangling from a low branch, a tuft of brown fur. He fluffed up the grass and he grabbed the fur to hide the evidence. "The sloth jumped out of the tree and snatched my sunbonnet right off my head, and then it ran toward Fur Street," said Mrs. Fruit while she patted her white hair. "That was my favorite sunbonnet." Ben didn't point out to Miss Fruit that sloths were not famous for moving very quickly, nor for jumping or running. She wanted to believe that it was a sloth that had taken her sunbonnet. Well, then, so let it be. At least she didn't think it was a Sasquatch. Mrs. Fruit squinted at Pearl. "Pearl? Pearl Petal, is that you? Did you do this?" "Do what?" said Pearl. "Did you put a sloth in my tree?" Miss Fruit wagged a finger at Pearl. "You have a reputation for trouble, young lady. You should stop messing around with people's trees." "I didn't," Pearl insisted. "Really, I didn't." "Well, I'd better call the police," said Miss Fruit. "They should know that there is a sloth on the loose in Buttonville." She turned her walker and began shuffling toward her house. "Shouldn't we stop her?" Ben asked. "Don't worry about it," Pearl said as she started down the sidewalk. The police will never believe her. Would you believe the oldest person in Buttonville if they told you that a sloth had jumped out of her tree and stolen her sunbonnet? No, Ben said as he followed. It kind of sounds like one of my stories. You write stories? No. I tell stories. I don't write them. Oh, so you mean you lie? I don't lie, Ben insisted. I tell stories. There is a difference. But his mother and father had both warned him that if he kept telling his stories instead of telling the truth, people would stop believing anything he said. Look, Pearl said. She collected a tuft of brown fur that clung to a fire hydrant. They found another one stuck on a rose bush. We're on the right track. A horn sounded and a blue and white police car pulled up to the curb. The words Buttonville Police Force were painted on the side. Ugh, that's my Aunt Millie. Come on, try to act natural, Pearl told them. How do you act natural when you are looking for a Sasquatch? Ben wondered. The window rolled down and the police officer stuck her head out. Hiya, Pearl. Who's your friend? Hi, Aunt Millie. Pearl shuffled in place. This is Ben Silverstein. He's visiting his grandpa for the summer. Hi, Ben said. Officer Millie removed her dark glasses and smiled at Ben. She had the kind of smile that showed all of her teeth, even the bottom ones. Nice to meet you, Ben. Your grandpa's, well, he's a swell guy. He made matzo ball soup for me when I had the flu. So, what are the two of you up to? You're not getting into trouble, are you? No, Pearl said, hiding the Sasquatch fur behind her back. We're just, walking around. Officer Millie eyed the metal box in Ben's hands. You sure you're not getting into trouble? I'm sure, said Pearl. No trouble, Ben confirmed. Okay, well, Officer Millie slid her glasses back on. Hey, I got a call a few minutes ago that there'd been an enormous dog running around without a leash. You wouldn't know anything about that, would you, Pearl? Why would I know anything about an enormous dog running around without a leash? Pearl asked innocently. I didn't do anything. Well, maybe you didn't do anything this time. Then Officer Millie shook her head and mumbled, My niece, the troublemaker. And she drove off. How come everybody calls you a troublemaker? Ben asked. Pearl kicked a rock and then tucked her shirt into her shiny blue basketball shorts. I don't get in trouble on purpose. I put food coloring in Mr. Mutt's koi pond because I thought it would look pretty. How was I supposed to know that it was going to dye all the fish too? And I set up that wind-up rat loose and let it loose during the parade because I was bored. Nobody ever told me that ponies were afraid of rats. Pearl and Ben stopped at the empty intersection. Ben looked around for footprints and tufts of fur, but found none. His gaze traveled up and down the street. Buttonville had to be the quietest place on earth. No honking cars, no blaring music, no traffic. The only sign of life was a man sweeping the sidewalk in front of the Buttonville clothing barn. Hey, watch it! The man yelled as a grocery cart rumbled past, nearly knocking him over. The rumbling grew louder as the cart rolled toward Pearl and Ben. Hey, wait a minute. That's one of our dollar store carts. Someone's taking a ride. Ugh, what's that smell? Ben asked. The kids jumped out of the way as the cart whizzed past. A pair of hairy arms stuck over the edge, a pair of hairy kneecaps and a sunbonnet peeked out of the top. Thanks to the slightest incline of the sidewalk, the cart began to pick up speed. The Sasquatch, Ben said. But Pearl wasn't there to hear him. She was already in pursuit. And that is chapter 15.